This is the 1978 World 600 and the entry fielded by team owner Will Cronkrite. It's also the car that Dale Earnhardt begged to drive in the event, that he worked so endlessly to help prepare, and that he started in the long and grueling event. But that's Harry Gant behind the wheel after Dale needed relief help. This is the story of how a young Dale Earnhardt wound up racing for Will Cronkrite, and how an even younger Dale Earnhardt Jr. watched helplessly as Will and his daddy worked on the race car. Will Cronkrite had planned on fielding a car for Willie T. Ribbs in the 1978 World 600, but the deal fell apart in the days leading up to the event. The news was announced on a local Charlotte television station. Enter Dale Earnhardt and Will Cronkrite.
Harold Johnson didn't get that out of his mouth, and the phone rings, and it's Dale. And Dale and I had done some work together. We weren't friends or anything, but associates. I'd helped him figure out some things about we were breaking springs when we were doing some welding, and I think we figured out what that was. So he had my phone number. He says, "Can I drive that car?" And I said, "Well, it's not my car right now. This is kind of one of them deals." He said, "Do you care if I call Humpy?" I said, "No." A minute later, Harold Johnson's still talking about it on the TV. Humpy called me and says, "You care if he drives your car?" I said, Humpy says, "You think he can keep it off the wall?" I don't remember saying that, but we made the agreement. And so in the book I write about, we lived 55 miles apart. Dale was there in 45 minutes.
That night?
That night, right then.
Although Earnhardt was demanding that night, Will didn't mind working with the young driver. He saw that much potential in the kid.
I'd been around ladies long enough to know if mama ain't happy, nobody's happy. And if a driver doesn't think you've given him everything, you ain't going to get everything. This is a chance. This is as much a chance for me as it was for Dale.
Really?
So I had as good a car as I'd ever had anything to do with. And he was not a foreign entity to me. I'd seen him run on the short tracks, and I'd also seen what he did to a couple cars in Atlanta that made me somewhat hesitant, but I was in, okay? And there's no sense being halfway in. So I said, "Listen," I told him, I'll do what you want. And I thought we were going to cut some holes in the existing seat brackets and move it forward because Buddy Baker was the last driver. We ended up moving it back, and we moved it down, and he'd get in. He'd say, "No, I'd like it a little bit longer." And I just did what he wanted. We both were crawling in. He was helping me. He wasn't just telling me to do it. He was helping me. And when we were done, we ended up cutting the floor pan and moving that whole frame thing down about 1.25 inches. And, and I've got the same look on my face now that you're seeing. And he said, "You don't understand this." And I told him the same thing. I said, "No, I told you I'd do what you wanted. I'm happy to do that. Don't have to understand all of it. I just want to go fast." He says, "Well, get in the car." So I crawl in. That was when I could sit in the car. And we're in the shop, and the wall's about 6 or 8 feet in front of the car. And he says, "When you turn into turn 1 at Charlotte and go over that little hump," he said, "Where's that car in front of you?" I just pointed to the wall in front of me. It says, "It's right there." And he kind of shrugged his shoulder. He says, "Where's the car in front of him?" And I just looked at him, and he says, "No. When you go into the turn, the car is turned up. The car that's in front of him is up here in the upper corner of the A-post."
If this was where our story stopped, it would serve only to add to the Intimidator mystique, especially when it comes to early in his career. The beaten down by life, yet hard as nails dreamer who would fight for every scrap he could possibly get on the racetrack. But this particular story doesn't end there. Dale brought his son Dale Jr. with him that night and left the child alone in his pickup truck as he and Will went through the fixes on the race car for hours on end. Dale Jr. was 3.5 years old at the time.
They came in an old pickup truck, nicely painted. He was parked outside the shop, within 15 feet of where we were, but Dale rolled the window down, went over to that side of the car, made sure he was situated, I guess, rolled the window about halfway down and never spoke to him. He just says, we'll be right back or something to that effect. And I'd watch. We'd both take a turn, take times to look out the window.
So he stayed in the truck
the whole time with his head sticking out the top half of that window. And he must have had a cold because there's snot running down the window glass. And
now,
never made a peep.
Love Dale Jr. or hate him, that's fine. But also know this. If you're one of those who insists that Dale Earnhardt Jr. was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, you don't have the slightest effing clue what you're talking about. And if Dale Jr. happened to have had some doors opened later in life because of his name, don't sweat it. He earned whatever came his way that night outside Will Cronkrite's shop.